Hey, how's it going? I'm making this video mostly for my dad. Uh, he knows a lot about communication and like to share it, but he's a little bit, I don't know, he's a bit of a coward, which I can be a bit of a coward. And the biggest difference, I guess, is that when I was younger, I came up with a couple different rules that I follow for when I want to do something that I think is right, but I'm being kind of a coward. So, rule number one of how to be a good coward is that if the amount of work you put into something is less than the amount of good that you get out of it, then you no longer have a choice whether you want to do it or not. You have to do it. So this comes from when I was younger. I was about 18, and a kid at the Toys R Us wanted a pack of Pokemon cards. He was with his mom, and part of me thought that it was no big deal. It's a $2 pack of Pokemon cards. It means nothing to me for the most part, and it would mean at least 15 minutes of happiness for him. So at the time, though, I started thinking about things like that I can't buy a strange kid that I don't know a pack of Pokemon cards because I'm a guy, so that would automatically make me some sort of sexual predator or someone who was doing something inappropriate. And so that's when I came up with the first rule, which was that if the amount of effort it takes you to do something good is less than the good that comes out of it, then you no longer have a choice whether you want to do it or not. You have to do it. So that's kind of helped me with a couple things in my life, because sometimes it can be nerve-wracking and you can come up with excuses for why you shouldn't say something nice or why you shouldn't do something nice for someone else, because you'll look weird or because someone will say something about you. So using that rule, it kind of always made me, as a bit of a coward, actually finally just do things that I should be doing. Another reason why I'm making this video, like I said, is because I believe my dad has the same tendencies sometimes, and I think we all do, to not do what is right because we're scared of the consequences, even though what we're doing is right. So the second rule that I came up with for being a good coward is that if the good realistic outcome of what you were going to do, and it has to be realistic, so the good realistic outcome of what you're deciding to do is better than what the worst realistic outcome is, then again, once those two questions are answered and you come up with a realistic idea, then you have to do it. It's not a choice anymore, you have to do it. And this one I kind of came up with when I was going to the bars in my 20s, I guess. And you'd be nervous to ask a girl out, or it also applies for things like when you're working at a job and you're not sure, you want to ask for a raise, but you're not sure if you deserve it, or if you just don't think that you can get it for yourself. So then this rule kind of comes into play, and so you just, again, for a lot of this you have to talk to yourself, or at least talk in your head. So you just weigh out the realistic worst case scenario and the realistic best case scenario. So the realistic best case scenario, if I was to ask a girl to dance at the bar or to talk with her a little bit more, the realistic best case scenario is that she'd say yes, I'd have a good night with her. Might not go very far, might not be a relationship, might not be marriage, but that night realistically would probably be more than I could have hoped for if it didn't work out. And then you just weigh the realistic bad case scenario. So the realistic bad case scenario of if you go up to a girl at the bar and you ask her to dance, or you tell her you're interested in talking, the realistic bad case scenario is that she says no, or that she has a girlfriend, or I mean a boyfriend, or it's not the worst case scenario. So basically that realistic worst case scenario would probably lead to about 20 minutes or maybe an hour, if you were feeling sensitive, of feeling rejected or shut down. But then you have to weigh the two of them. So then the best case scenario, realistic best case scenario, would be that the night was great, we danced, we had fun, you're happy, whatever. And the realistic worst case scenario is that you don't feel good for 20 minutes, maybe an hour. Takes you a bit to get over it, but you get right back at her. So once you've weighed the two options out and the realistic best case scenario is far better than the realistic worst case scenario, then now you have to do it. I don't know. It's kind of almost like a formula, I guess, for how to not be a coward when you're trying to just do something that's good anyways. So you just take one, you add two, and if one is greater than two, now you have to do it. It's not a question of if you want to do it, you have to do it. Which again, that's why I've come to the conclusion of doing this, because even though I'm not a great speaker and I get pretty nervous, even though it's just me on the picture of a phone right now, once I weighed out the best case scenario and the worst case scenario, I had to do it. The only other, not even advice or anything, but I guess suggestions would be, a lot of people, and this is something my dad's taught me, a lot of people, well, everyone really that gets married gets to the altar and wants it to work out. Once you're at that point, I don't think anyone's standing at the altar saying, I hope she says no. So once you get to that point, there must be something that happens after that point that causes it to fall apart or not work out. And this is something that I find works with not only relationships with your wife, but also relationships with friends or anyone really. And the most basic form of it is what my father's taught me, is the 4 steps of communication. 4 steps of communication. Step 1, you figure out what you're actually upset about. You figure out what you're actually having an argument about. So sometimes you can be in an argument and she could say you didn't do the dishes, and you can say, well, I cleaned the room and you don't help clean the room, and she could say, well, you watch 4 hours of TV and we don't get any time together. And if you argue about too many things, you might be completely right about 2 of those things and she's completely right about the other thing she's arguing about, but in the end result it still gets you both nowhere. So step 1 is just identifying what you're arguing about. It can be 3 problems, but you need to break it down to at least 1 at a time so you can, it's easier to figure it out. So step 1, identify the problem. Step 2 is just come up with a solution that works for both of you. It doesn't have to be the end solution. It doesn't have to be a perfect solution. It just needs to be a solution that you're both willing to at least give it a try. Step 3 is just work the solution. Usually it's good to come up with a time frame. If you come up with a time frame, then you can write it down, use a whiteboard, or keep track of it and see if it was a huge issue to begin with or if it was just something that was bothering you that day. But it gives you a timeline to come back to it later so you can see if it's still the same as it was before or if it's gotten better. And then that leads us to step 4. And step 4 is just that once you evaluate it and try to figure out what was going on, if it was working or if it wasn't working, step 4 is just deciding whether or not you need to go back to step 1 and try to figure out a solution again. It seems like a longer process than just yelling or arguing, but if you yell or argue 100 times a year and it only takes 10 seconds every time you argue because you yell at each other, then that's 1,000 seconds. Whereas if you just spend 10 minutes figuring it out and writing it down, and you do that, I don't know, now I can't, 6 times a year, it's only 60 minutes that you've wasted to fix those 6 problems, as opposed to wasting 1,000 minutes arguing or just yelling with each other. So more in detail about that kind of stuff, you can talk to my dad, who will be starting up Fred Talk pretty soon. And yeah, he goes way in more depth about proper communication and the way to treat other people the way that you want to be treated in nonviolent communication. So if you're interested in more in-depth stuff like that, then you're welcome to tune into his YouTube page, which I'm soon will be happening soon. And just the last thing to leave you on an idea that I had. It's not even any more opinions or anything, just an idea that I had, that I've always liked the idea that the truth is like a light, and you can pile as many lies onto it as you want. You can, almost like a black hole over top of a star, you can amass millions of pounds of pressure against that truth or that light, and it can never be completely destroyed. But the reverse is not true at all, that if there's only an atom or an electron's worth of truth left, which will always be there, as soon as you realize that truth, it can blow apart the lies, it can blow apart everything, so there's nothing left except for the fact that you understand that that was the truth. And I find that that's always helped me a lot with when I feel down or when I feel like I'm worthless, or that I don't feel that I'm contributing enough, that idea or that thought, when you just realistically look at what you've done and realistically look at who you are and what you do have to contribute, and you, even if there's a microscopic amount of truth in it, once you realize that truth, that you're not useless or that you do have something to contribute, then it can blow apart all the lies. So that's it.